This video is entitled Requirements Determination and is the first part of the analysis phase. This goes along with Chapter 3 of our book, Systems Analysis and Design, 7th edition by Dennis Wixom Roth. And I'm James Imrano, PhD from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this presentation. So, we're moving into the analysis phase. We've done our planning, and we're now moving into our analysis. We know how the methodology we're going to kind of run the project by. We've kind of done a quick work breakdown structure, and now we're going to jump into figuring out what we really need the system to do. There are three things that we're going to do in the analysis phase. The first is we need to understand the as-is system. We need to understand the current system completely, because if you don't understand what the client is currently doing, you'll miss things, you'll forget things, you won't see things, and you won't fully understand all the business rules and business processes that you've got to integrate into your new system. You need to identify improvements and efficiencies. Why are we creating this new system? Why is the as-is system not sufficient? What do we need to add to it? What's the future hold? And then by understanding the current system and identifying all those improvements, we can define the needs of our to-be system, of our new system. So that's what we're going to be doing in the analysis phase. When we're done with the analysis phase, we should have in our hands a system proposal, a formal, written, defined, that is if we're following the systems development lifecycle, a formal, defined systems proposal. In that should be some walkthroughs, and a clear value for the business has to be delineated and argued and defined in this systems proposal. So I said we're going to try to figure out what the requirements of the system are during this analysis phase. What are the needs? And the needs I'm going to break down into four kind of general categories of needs. The first would be the business requirements. What does the business need this system to do? That kind of makes sense. Then, what are the user requirements? What things are the users going to require? Do we need a web interface? Do we need to be able to use the software remotely? Do we you get those ideas of what are the user requirements for this system, reliability, uptime, all of those kinds of things. Functional requirements are the third type of requirement, and functional requirements actually go into all of those functions within the software. What specific processes must the software be able to do? What specific pieces of information do we need to be able to generate? What data do we need to collect to be able to give us that information? So those are functional requirements that deal with the whole functions. And then there's a whole category of requirements we call non-functional requirements, which are characteristics of the system. They're kind of systems requirement. The non-functional requirements are kind of just general characteristics of the function of the system. And then actually the fifth category are the systems requirements. How's it built? So we need to have all five of these types of requirements in our heads as we start doing our analysis. There are five main techniques that I'm going to talk about for how to get these requirements from our users and from our managers, and as we do this analysis. I think interviews, questionnaires, observations, document analysis, and then something called joint application development are the five big ways that analysts will use to try to figure out and to dig in and get what those real requirements are. And I'm going to go through each of the five of these in detail. The first elicitation methodology or method is the good old-fashioned interview. sitting down with individuals, sitting in a conference room, taking them to lunch, sitting around a table, and interviewing users, managers, and all of the people that are going to be stakeholders that are going to be involved at different levels with the system. It's the most commonly used technique, um, and you need to interview people at all of the different levels of the system. For instance, a senior manager might have one vision of the system, what they want the system to do, and how they believe the system works, versus the person who's actually doing it, maybe your customer service reps or your warehouse people or your manufacturing people. They are using the system at a completely different level, feeding it data that management doesn't even know is in there. They just see the results of that data. So you're going to get completely different views of the system. Stop and think about the idea of what's a mouse look like to an ant? Well, to an ant, little tiny ant, a mouse looks like an elephant, right? It's huge and gray, and whoa, it's scary as could be. But to us, from a different level, a mouse is a mouse. Um, okay, some people are frightened of them, but it's just a little itty bitty rodent. No big deal. We can deal with that one. Um, so at different levels, people will have very different views. Before you walk into an interview, be prepared. Okay, don't go into an interview cold. Have some meaningful questions. Understand what you're going to ask. Don't waste people's time by asking them things you already know or by asking them things that they don't know. Senior management is not going to understand some of the little bits of the system. Some of the people that are doing the little bits of the system aren't going to understand what senior management wants. They just don't. So don't waste people's time. Don't ask questions you already know the answer to. Um, and really, there are three kinds of questions you're going to use in the interview process. And you've talked about these in other courses, I hope, by this point. But the closed-ended questions are asking for simple facts. How many transactions per month will we do with this system? Boom, there's a number. All you get a number. Um, you've got open-ended questions where you're trying to ask the user for thoughts and ideas. Well, it looks like that's a very complex problem. Can you explain that to me? Can you lay that out step by step to me, how that works? And how do you handle this exception? And get them to tell you their thoughts, get them to tell you their ideas, and that also leads into probing questions, which is a kind of an open-ended question that's really open-ended. Well, why do you think that happens? Can you give me some examples of when that happens? Because you're probing for that detailed stuff that's going to get missed otherwise if you don't really ask these open-ended questions. So interviews. Problem with interviews, though, is that you're an analyst. You're here to design a new system. You're here to replace an old system. You're here to possibly downsize because we're spending all this money on this system and we won't need all these employees. You're going to automate things, and people are going to be like, I don't want to tell you this. Now they're not going to look at you in the face and say, I'm not telling you this, because they're employees, they have to keep their jobs. But will there be playing the card, playing with your cards up close? Will there be some reluctance to tell you things? And the answer is yes. You're going to need to be open. You're going to need to be honest. You're going to need to be personable. You're going to need every skill that you have to be able to do good interviews. Another technique that's used often are questionnaires where you can sample a really large group. If you've got 1,000 employees scattered all over the world and you've got a series of questions, you can come up with a list of questions and send them out as a questionnaire. Now, typically, 30 to 50% of email questionnaires are returned. People look at it and go, I'll do it later, or I don't have time, or who cares? They don't listen to me anyway. Um, so only 30 to 50% of email questionnaires are returned. Um, and 5 to 30% of questionnaires on websites will be done. So if you put up a questionnaire on the intranet site, how many employees are actually going to spend the time to, well, there's a questionnaire. Do I want to? Nah, forget it. Who cares? And the thing about questionnaires is because you're not getting a full sample of you're getting a selection, you're getting a biased, a convenience sample. Um, you're not getting a true sampling of your employees, of the people you sent it out to. Often questionnaires are responded to by extremes. I get an email for a questionnaire. If customer service was okay, if it was typical, if it was normal, if it was expected, I just delete it because I'm not going to answer that. If somebody has gone out of their way and done fabulous things for me, I'll go fill out a questionnaire and say, fives all the way down. They were fabulous, wonderful. I love them. And if they didn't solve the problem, if they didn't do what I wanted them to do, I'm going to fill out the questionnaire and I'm going to roast everybody from senior management to middle management to that poor person on the phone who wasn't given the power to solve the problem. I'm not going to say that person was horrible. I'm going to say that management sucks because they didn't give that person the power to solve the problem. But I answer questionnaires in the extreme. Either I love it, wow, it was amazing, and I say that, or it's like, blah, I hate you, and that's why I fill out a questionnaire. If I'm ambivalent about a situation, I'm not gonna bother. And I think looking at those statistics, most other people kind of feel that way. Usually, you use closed-end questions to verify assumptions. So maybe you've created a list of you've done some interviews, you've gotten a whole bunch of things, you've had to make some leaps of thought to get from point A to point B. You've created some assumptions, and then to create a questionnaire with some of those things. Well, I didn't get an answer in the questionnaire interviews over about this. Let's put that in the questionnaire and see what people say as whether I'm right or wrong, or on a scale of 1 to 10, am I closer to right or wrong or whatever. So usually they're very closed-in questions, and in my opinion, questionnaires aren't very useful. They generate nice charts and that kind of stuff. And I guess if you've got thousands of potential users, um, asking some of these and getting rid of some of these assumptions and clearing some things up using a questionnaire makes sense. But um, and maybe asking a questionnaire about features. If you could work from home, would you? If you could do this, would you? Would you use a smartphone app if it was part of the system? Those kind of things. A questionnaire might be a good. Or what type of internet do you have at home, or what type of equipment do you already own at home? Because we'd like to maybe use it. That kind of a questionnaire might make sense. The next technique, which is kind of directly related to interviewing, is observation. And it's the act of watching someone. Now, there's a whole field of social sciences called anthropology, which deals with watching culture, watching organization, understanding culture and organization. And most of us as information systems and IT people don't have a lot of extensive training in anthropology. I wish we did more of that because as an analyst, a lot of your You're going to be doing some of this observation. The trick is you want to be low profile. You don't want to change behavior with your observation. And people are going to change their behavior when you're watching because they might not show you what they actually do. You know, if they know they're being recorded by a video camera, are they going to violate policy that they might do on a little bit more regular basis? Are they going to be afraid for their job? Are they, so observation is by watching, you're actually changing how people react. Um, this is a great way, though, to supplement the document gathering, and we'll talk about that in a future slide, and interviews and the data and the information you've collected through an interview. Many, many years ago, I was working as a consultant, and I was doing the analysis and design of a system for a trucking company. I'd gathered documents, I'd gathered all the paperwork, I'd gotten examples of the freight billing, and I'd gotten examples of the dispatch process, and I'd gotten examples of this, and I'd gotten screenshots from the old systems, and I kind of had an understanding how it worked. But there was this document that they gave me, and it was this big piece of paper document. I swear the paper document was probably 24, 28 inches wide by 24 inches long, and it was this great big pad with a big binder clip on the end, and it had all kinds of scribbles and notations, and they would pass it around a room, and that's how they dispatch trucks. That's how they told drivers where to go and what to pick up. Well, this dispatch sheet, as they called it, was, even though I had them in my hands, I had the documents in my hands, I really had no idea what they did. And the dispatchers and the dispatch managers told me how they worked. And I had my interviews with them, and I kind of had an understanding of how it worked, but I actually didn't understand the process until I sat in dispatch and actually watched them. And I didn't just watch them, I spent a full week with those employees, being in the middle, actually answering the phone, picking up the document, making the notations that they told me to make, and watching it pass. And when I would watch something happen, like a truck breakdown, and they'd grab the document and freak out and scribble it on the whiteboard and scribble it over here and make a little note on the form and pass it around. It's like, what just happened and why did you do that? And everybody was comfortable with me because they kind of wanted the system. They were tired of doing it this old way. And by observation, I was able to truly understand what was happening. And without spending that time to slow down, without spending that time to get to know the process, without having the time to sit down and drink the coffee and watch a sausage get made, I wouldn't have been able to properly analyze and design that system. The next area that I'd like to talk about, and I mentioned it in the last slide, was document analysis. In document analysis, we actually go collect artifacts from the old system. We collect artifacts of how they do things. And when I mean an artifact document analysis, you're as much an archaeologist as you are a sociologist as you are an analyst. Because during the document analysis phase, we're going to go get copies of our old reports. We're going to get copies of all of those forms. You know, there's a form to do this. There's a form to do this. There's a form that we have to do this. There's a paper document that we do this, and it passes to these people and gets signed off by these people, and then it gets entered in the computer here. And so we collect all of those and understand where they fit in everything else. We get we get screenshots of old systems or of current systems, or we get procedure manuals. We actually sit down and watch the user and collect those. Lots of people will have a cheat sheet in their desk drawer of how to do something. You know, well, there's this procedure manual, but it doesn't make any sense. Here's my little one-page quickie notes that I use to get through this. That's golden. That is like manna from heaven. That is like solid gold finding those kinds of things because um, when you collect those informal spreadsheets, email chains, access databases, uh, that people have created, you now are really getting into the details of the system, and look for those informal things, those spreadsheets that people pass around by email that the system doesn't generate or that they keep on their own, or those informal ad hoc kind of things. Um, and then look for how these artifacts are used differently than they were originally designed to be used. Maybe this report was designed to do this, but the user takes that report, copies it, pastes it, cuts it, puts it into Excel, creates a pivot table, draws this chart, and that's what they really use. Or they take data from this report and they massage it together into something that they really need. So look for how tools, processes that were originally designed are used in a way that aren't the way they were originally designed. And this document analysis process is extremely helpful. Now, you're going to do this through your interview process. You're going to do this during your questionnaire process. You're going to collect these documents during your observation process. Um, so this is just another piece of that whole being an anthropologist, being an archaeologist, um, being a communicator. That you're going to be collecting these documents, but these things are like gold. The last elicitation method that the book talks about is something called joint application development. And in a JAD or JAD process, what happens is that instead of the analyst going to individuals and scheduling individual time and doing the interviews and doing the questionnaires and doing the document analysis and document collection, instead of the observations all happening, what happens is in joint application development, we put managers, users, and developers in a room together. We actually lock them in a room or a hotel suite or a virtual Zoom room or something. And we meet for several uninterrupted hours over several days or several hours each week for several weeks. We use whiteboards. We may have a secretary there to record everything that's said. We'll have somebody as a facilitator. And during these joint application development sessions, we'll all sit around and say, well, we need the system to do this. And then somebody will say, yeah, but this. And then somebody will say this. And the facilitator or one of the analysts or one of the programmers will jump up and draw a screen on the whiteboard or draw a flow chart on the whiteboard and say, you mean something like this? And they'll go, yeah, and then we'll take a picture of that. We'll keep moving forward, or the secretary will record that, and then we'll keep moving forward. So it's a process of bringing everybody together into a room. This is a technique IBM created many years ago. Uh, I've never been involved in one of these joint application development sessions, but I've got some friends that are working for larger businesses and doing analysis for major consulting firms, and they use these techniques. Often, this is kind of used first before we then go collect all of our artifacts, or it's used after we've already done some interviews and some artifact collection and we kind of know what we're doing. And then as we all are communicating, we all know what we're doing, we then get in a room and hash out exactly what all we need. Kind of makes sense. So here's a chart, figure 311 from the textbook, that talks about the type of information that we're collecting, talks about the 5 different methodologies for collecting, for eliciting this information, and then kind of how it works. For instance, an interview. An interview is great for everything, as is information as-is system, improvements to the system, the to-be system. Those are the kinds of things that you can get from an interview. You can get really deep into the details with an interview because the interviewee knows what they do. They know their job very well, or they wouldn't have the job. And many of them have been at their job for years and decades. So they've got a real deep knowledge of what they do. Now, does somebody who handles accounts receivable or handles this one piece of the system understand the entire system? Probably not. So interviews are great for getting the deep information, but not the broad information. Um, Integrating that high and low level, deep and broad information, do an interview help you know? For user involvement, it's somewhat intensive for the user. A little bit. We're taking a few hours out of your day or a few minutes out of your day several times, and then the cost is it's somewhat costly, but not very costly. Um, Questionnaires, on the other hand, if you see they're good for as in they're good for improvements. Would you like to see the following features? That's a good question for a questionnaire. You can get some depth because you can focus the questionnaire to the people that need the questionnaire. Will you get broad information about a system? Yes. Will it be very integrated? No. Does it take users a lot of time to do? No. Is it costly? No, it's very inexpensive actually. Um, Document analysis. Document analysis gives us a lot of information about the as-is system. Now, it says the depth of the information is low. I actually believe it's higher than that because if you go get all those detailed forms and all those detailed documents, you probably have got a lot of low-level information and a lot of depth of information. Can you get breadth of knowledge about the system from document analysis? Absolutely. Um, how much time does it take a user when you're out collecting documents? Not much at all. They go, well, this is the form I use. Okay, thanks. Um, and the cost of that is low. Um, Observation again. Now they say that observation is low in breadth, depth, integration, user involvement, and low to medium in cost. Um, and it's all about the as-is system. But if observation is tied into document analysis, is tied into interviews, all kind of at the same time, um, you can get a lot of really great information that way. And then the idea of the joint application design or JAD sessions. Um, it says that because we've got lots of people in the room together, lots of experts, we're going to get depth, we're going to get breadth, we're going to get a good integrated understanding of it. We're going to really involve users because we're locking them away from their daily day-to-day tasks, the ones that we invite into the JAD session. So that's just kind of an interesting view but I think really to pull off a system, you're going to need to use a combination of multiple ones of these, 3 or 4 of these techniques every time. But the mix of percentage of the techniques might be different from project to project. This video is copyright by James M. Renault, PhD. You can contact me at jrenault@shawnee.edu with any questions. The chart on the previous slide was the work of the author of the textbook, and their copyright information was noted on that slide. I'd like to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in subsequent videos.